The autumn wind rustled through the trees as Maya drove home from her chemotherapy session, her hands gripping the steering wheel a bit tighter than usual. She was tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that only people who've gone through chemo would understand. The setting sun cast long shadows across the suburban Minneapolis streets, and she was looking forward to curling up in her favorite blanket with a cup of her mom's ginger tea. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror made her heart skip a beat. She'd been following all the traffic rules, keeping well within the speed limit. Her dad had always taught her to be extra careful while driving. Maya carefully pulled over to the side of the road, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for her license and registration. Through her side mirror, she watched two officers approach her car. The taller one came to her window while his partner hung back slightly. Maya lowered her window, trying her best to smile despite her exhaustion. "License and registration," the officer demanded, his voice sharp and unfriendly. There was something in his tone that made Maya's stomach tighten. She handed over her documents with trembling fingers. Is everything okay, officer?" she asked softly. "Was I speeding?" The officer shone his flashlight directly into her face, making her squint. His eyes narrowed as he studied her features, then moved to the wig she wore. A beautiful brown one that her mom had helped her pick out when her hair first started falling out. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand resting on his belt. Maya's heart began racing. "Sir, I just finished my chemotherapy session. I'm not feeling very well. Could you please tell me what this is about?" The second officer shifted uncomfortably behind her partner, but remained silent. More cars were slowing down now, some even stopping to watch what was happening. Maya could feel her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," the first officer said, his voice getting harder. "And that hair, it doesn't look real. You're wearing a disguise, aren't you?" Tears welled up in Maya's eyes, but she fought them back. "It's a wig, sir. I have cancer. I can show you my hospital ID and my medical papers. They're in my purse." But the officer wasn't listening. His face had taken on a look of grim determination that made Maya's blood run cold. She could hear people murmuring nearby. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. The evening air felt thick with tension. The second officer finally spoke up, her voice uncertain. "Maybe we should check her ID first." But her partner had already made up his mind. He was convinced he'd caught someone suspicious, someone trying to hide their identity. Maya sat there, her heart pounding against her chest as the situation spiraled out of her control. All she'd wanted was to get home, to rest, to feel normal for just one evening. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the gathering crowd. Cars continued to slow down, more people stopped to watch, and Maya felt her world shrinking, becoming smaller and more frightening with each passing second. She clutched her purse tighter, feeling the comfort of her hospital ID card inside. Proof of who she really was, proof of her daily battles that had nothing to do with police or suspects or mistaken identities. Little did anyone know that this moment, captured on dozens of phone cameras in the fading light of day, would soon spark a controversy that would shake their quiet suburban community to its core. But for now, Maya just sat there, a scared young girl far too familiar with fighting battles, about to face one she never expected. The tension in the air grew thicker as Officer Morrison stepped closer to Maya's car, his shadow looming over her window. His partner, Officer Kim, shifted her weight from one foot to another, clearly uncomfortable with how things were unfolding. The evening traffic had slowed to a crawl as more people gathered to watch the scene. "I said, step out of the vehicle," Officer Morrison repeated, his voice carrying an edge that made Maya's hands tremble even more. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, trying to keep her movements calm and deliberate. The chemotherapy had left her dizzy, and the last thing she needed was to stumble and make things worse. As she stepped out, the cool evening air hit her face. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand straight. A small group of onlookers had gathered on the sidewalk, their phones raised like silent witnesses to what was unfolding. "Officer, please." Maya tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain everything. I'm just trying to get home from the hospital." She reached for her purse to show her medical documents, but Officer Morrison's sharp voice stopped her. "Hands where I can see them." He barked, causing several people in the crowd to gasp. Maya froze, her arms slowly rising to shoulder height, her purse dropping back into the car seat. The weight of dozens of eyes on her made her wish she could disappear. Officer Kim finally took a step forward. "Sir, maybe we should." "I know what I'm doing." Morrison cut her off. He turned back to Maya, his eyes fixed on her wig. "That's a disguise, and you know it. Remove it now." Maya's bottom lip quivered. The wig wasn't just a piece of fake hair to her. It was her shield, her way of feeling normal when everything else in her life had turned upside down. "Please," she whispered, "not here. Not in front of everyone." But Officer Morrison had already made up his mind. A middle-aged woman from the crowd called out, "Leave her alone. Can't you see she's scared?" Others joined in with murmurs of disapproval, but Morrison seemed to grow more determined with each protest. The sun had nearly set now, and the flashing police lights painted everything in alternating red and blue. Maya could see her reflection in her car window. Pale, frightened, looking so much younger than her 17 years. The nausea from her treatment was getting worse, and spots were dancing at the edges of her vision. Officer Kim pulled out her flashlight, shining it on Maya's hospital parking permit hanging from the rearview mirror. Her expression changed as she read it, but before she could say anything, Morrison stepped even closer to Maya. "Last warning," he said, his hand resting on his belt. "Remove the disguise, or I'll have to consider this resisting an officer." The crowd had grown larger. Some people were shouting now, telling Morrison to stop, while others filmed everything on their phones. Maya could hear snippets of their conversations. "This isn't right. Someone call the station. Look at her hospital tag." Through her fear and exhaustion, Maya felt something else rising, a deep sense of injustice. She'd fought so hard through her treatments, faced so many challenges with courage, only to be humiliated here on a public street. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she stood her ground, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she had. "My name is Maya," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm a cancer patient at Memorial Hospital, and this is my medical wig. I have every right to wear it." The moment hung in the air like a thundercloud about to break. Officer Kim's flashlight beam caught something glinting in Maya's fallen purse, her hospital ID badge, peeking out among her belongings. But before she could reach for it, Morrison had already made a decision that would change everything. For himself, for Maya, and for their entire community. The next few moments unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Officer Morrison reached forward, his fingers grasping the edge of Maya's wig. The crowd's protests grew louder, but their voices seemed distant and muffled to Maya, as if she were underwater. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Stop, please," she begged, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. With one swift motion, Morrison pulled the wig from her head. The cool evening air hit Maya's bare scalp, and she instinctively raised her hands to cover herself. Her fingers touched the smooth skin where her hair used to be, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted in outrage. A woman rushed forward with her jacket held high, trying to shield Maya from the growing number of phone cameras. "She's just a child," someone shouted from the crowd. Another voice called out, "This is abuse of power." Officer Kim finally found her voice. "That's enough," she said firmly to her partner, but the damage was already done. Maya stood there, exposed and trembling, as Morrison held her wig like it was evidence in a crime. The flashing police lights seemed to spotlight her vulnerability, making her feel like she was on stage in some horrible play she never agreed to be in. An elderly man stepped forward from the crowd, his face red with anger. "I'm calling the station right now," he announced, phone already pressed to his ear. "My daughter went through chemo last year. This is absolutely disgraceful." Maya's legs began to shake. The combined stress of her chemotherapy session and this traumatic experience was becoming too much to bear. She leaned against her car for support, her vision blurring at the edges. A kind-looking woman from the crowd approached slowly, hands raised to show she meant no harm. "Honey, I'm a nurse," she said softly. "You don't look well. Would you like to sit down?" But before Maya could answer, Officer Morrison blocked the woman's path. "Step back, ma'am. This is a police matter." The nurse stood her ground. "This is a medical matter. Look at her hospital bracelet. She's clearly just had treatment today." More people were arriving now, drawn by the commotion. Cars honked as they slowly drove by, their occupants craning their necks to see what was happening. Some stopped completely, adding to the growing crowd of witnesses. Phones continued to record, capturing every moment of Maya's humiliation. Through her tears, Maya could see Officer Kim bending down to pick something up. Her hospital ID badge had fallen from her purse. The female officer's face changed as she read it, her eyes widening with recognition. She quickly turned to her partner, urgency in her voice. "Morrison, we've made a terrible mistake. Look at this ID. She's Dr. Chen's daughter, the oncologist from Memorial." But even this revelation didn't seem to shake Morrison's conviction. He held Maya's wig up to the light, examining it like it was contraband. "Protocol is protocol," he muttered, but there was a new uncertainty in his voice. Maya's whole body was shaking now. The evening had turned chilly, and without her wig, she felt exposed in every possible way. Her reflection in the car window showed a pale, frightened girl she barely recognized, so different from the strong, hopeful person she tried to be during her cancer treatments. The crowd's anger was reaching a boiling point. Phone cameras captured everything. The trembling girl, the aggressive officer, the weight held aloft like a trophy, and the growing mass of outraged citizens. In the distance, the sound of more police sirens could be heard approaching. Through the chaos, Maya caught sight of her phone on the car seat, displaying a missed call from her father. She thought about him working his night shift at the hospital, completely unaware that his daughter was going through this nightmare just a few miles away. Soon, she knew, this scene would be all over social media, and her private struggle with cancer would become a public spectacle. All because one officer refused to show basic human compassion. Officer Kim's hands trembled as she held Maya's hospital ID badge under the streetlight. The plastic card told a story that changed everything. There was Maya's photo, taken before her chemotherapy began, her bright smile and long dark hair, a stark contrast to the frightened, exposed young woman standing before them now. But it was the parent information section that made Officer Kim's heart stop. Emergency contact, Dr. David Chen, Chief Oncologist, Memorial Hospital. 6 months ago, Officer Kim had sat in Dr. Chen's office, holding her mother's hand as he explained treatment options with such kindness and patience. He had worked miracles, giving her mother a second chance at life. And now, here she was, watching his daughter being humiliated on a public street. "Morrison," she called out again, her voice stronger this time. "This isn't just any patient. Remember that doctor I told you about? The one who saved my mom's life?" She held up the ID badge, her hand shaking. "This is his daughter." The change in Morrison's face was subtle but unmistakable. His grip on Maya's wig loosened slightly as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The crowd, still recording everything, had grown eerily quiet, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Maya swayed slightly on her feet, the evening's events taking their toll. The kind nurse who had tried to help earlier stepped forward again, and this time, Neither officer stopped her. She wrapped her own scarf around Maya's head with gentle movements, offering what privacy she could. "I've been Dr. Chen's patient for 2 years," the nurse explained, her voice carrying in the quiet street. "He stays late every single day, making sure each patient feels heard and cared for. And this is how we treat his daughter." More voices joined in, a chorus of stories about Dr. Chen. "He helped my brother through stage 4 cancer," someone called out. "He never gave up on him." Another voice added, "He comes in on weekends to check on critical patients." The crowd was no longer just angry. They were personally invested, connected to this story in ways Officer Morrison hadn't expected. Maya's phone began ringing again in her car, her father's familiar ringtone cutting through the tension. Officer Kim quickly retrieved it and handed it to Maya, who answered with a shaky voice. "Dad," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Something's happened." The crowd fell silent, watching as Maya briefly explained the situation to her father. Officer Morrison shifted uncomfortably, the wig still in his hands, now feeling like it was burning his fingers. He could hear the muffled but clearly upset voice of Dr. Chen through the phone. "He's on his way," Maya said quietly, ending the call. "He's leaving the hospital right now." Officer Kim stepped forward, gently taking the wig from her partner's hands. She carefully approached Maya, offering it back with an apology in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I should have spoken up sooner." The gathered crowd watched as Maya's trembling fingers reached for her wig. The nurse helped her put it back on, adjusting it with the expertise of someone who had helped many patients before. Some people in the crowd wiped away tears. Others pulled out their phones again, not to record this time, but to share what they had witnessed with local news stations and social media. In the distance, they could hear the sound of more police cars approaching, along with what seemed to be local news vans. The story was already spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. What had started as a simple traffic stop had transformed into something much bigger. A moment that would force their community to confront its prejudices and examine how they treated their most vulnerable members. Officer Morrison stood rooted to the spot, the weight of his actions finally hitting him. He had been so sure, so convinced he was right, that he had forgotten the most basic part of his job, to protect and serve all members of his community, especially those who needed protection the most. The video spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By midnight, millions had watched the footage of Maya's humiliation. The shaky phone recording showed everything: the harsh commands, the pulled wig, the tears, and the community's outrage. Local news stations picked up the story immediately, their vans now parked along the street where it all happened. Inside Memorial Hospital's busy emergency room, Dr. Chen sat beside his daughter, his doctor's coat still on from his rushed departure from his rounds. His hand held Maya's tightly as they watched the incident replay on the waiting room TV. The news anchor's voice was solemn. "Tonight, we bring you a disturbing story of alleged police misconduct involving a teenage cancer patient." Maya's phone buzzed continuously with messages of support from friends, family, and even strangers who had seen the video. Her social media accounts were flooded with friend requests and supportive comments. But all she wanted was to go home and forget this nightmare had ever happened. "Dad," she whispered, leaning against his shoulder, "I just wanted to get home and rest. I didn't do anything wrong." Dr. Chen took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. As a doctor, he was used to staying calm in difficult situations, but seeing his daughter treated this way tested every ounce of his professional composure. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Outside the hospital, reporters gathered, hoping to catch a statement from the renowned oncologist and his daughter. The police department's public relations team was working overtime, issuing statements and promising a full investigation. Social media was ablaze with hashtags demanding justice and police reform. The nurse who had helped Maya at the scene had shared her own video, which quickly went viral too. Her tearful description of knowing Dr. Chen and his work touched hearts worldwide. This man has saved countless lives, including my patients. His daughter showed more dignity in her suffering than those meant to protect her. Back at the police station, Officer Kim sat in the chief's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had just finished getting her statement about the incident. "I should have done more," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "I knew something was wrong from the start." The police chief rubbed his temples, looking at the flood of emails and calls coming in. The mayor's office had already reached out, demanding immediate action. Civil rights organizations were planning protests for the morning. The incident had become much bigger than a simple traffic stop gone wrong. Around 2 a.m., Maya's phone lit up with a message that made her pause. It was from a 12-year-old cancer patient she had befriended during her treatments. The young girl had sent a photo of herself, proudly bald, with the message, "You showed me it's okay to be brave. Thank you for standing up to them." Dr. Chen saw the tears in his daughter's eyes as she read the message. Despite his anger and sadness, he felt a surge of pride. His daughter's trauma was somehow becoming a source of strength for others fighting their own battles. The hospital administration had called an emergency meeting for the morning. They wanted to address the incident and show support for one of their most respected doctors and his family. Flowers and cards had already started arriving at Dr. Chen's office, many from former patients and their families. As the night wore on, the video continued to spread. People shared their own stories of discrimination, of battling illness, of fighting for dignity in difficult moments. Maya's experience had touched a nerve, bringing to light issues that many had faced but few had captured on camera. In their quiet hospital room, Maya finally dozed off, exhausted from the day's events. Dr. Chen watched his sleeping daughter, still wearing the wig that had caused so much trouble. Tomorrow would bring more challenges: interviews, investigations, decisions about how to proceed. But for now, in the quiet of the hospital room, he focused on the strength he saw in his daughter's face, even in sleep. The incident would change things, he knew. It had to. Sometimes it took a moment of profound injustice to wake people up, to make them see what needed to change. As a doctor, he had always believed in healing, not just bodies, but hearts and minds too. Maybe, just maybe, this painful experience would lead to healing of a different kind. The morning after the incident brought a flurry of activity to the police department. The chief of police stood before a room packed with journalists, camera flashes lighting up his grim face. "What happened last night is not what our department stands for," he announced, his voice firm. "Officer Morrison has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation." Meanwhile, Officer Kim sat in her patrol car, parked outside the station. She had just finished writing her official statement, 8 pages detailing everything she had witnessed. Her hands shook as she read it one last time. Finally, she had done what she should have done the night before, spoken up. The hospital lobby was filled with supporters. People from all walks of life had come to show their support for Maya and Dr. Chen. Many wore head coverings of various kinds, bandanas, scarves, caps, in solidarity. A young boy held up a sign that read, "My doctor, my hero." His mother, a former patient of Dr. Chen's, wiped tears from her eyes. Inside his office, Dr. Chen met with hospital administrators and civil rights leaders. The room was tense with unspoken emotion. "This isn't just about my daughter," he said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "This is about every patient who has ever felt vulnerable, every person who has ever been judged unfairly." The hospital's head of security played surveillance footage from the parking garage, showing Maya leaving after her treatment. She had done everything right, used her pass, followed all protocols. The footage would be crucial in the investigation. At home, Maya sat on her bed, surrounded by cards and messages. Her best friend read comments from social media. "You're so brave. Stay strong. Your story helped me speak up." Local businesses had sent food, flowers, and cards. A wig company had even offered to provide her with free wigs for life. But it was a different kind of message that caught Maya's attention. Officer Kim had sent a handwritten letter. "I failed you last night. I saw what was happening and didn't stop it fast enough. Your father saved my mother's life last year, and I couldn't even protect his daughter. I'm breaking my silence because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes being a good officer means standing up to other officers." The letter sparked something in Maya. She turned to her father and said, "Dad, I want to speak at the police department's next training session. They need to hear from real people, not just read about policies." The community response continued to grow. Local business owners formed a coalition to fund sensitivity training for police officers. The mayor announced the formation of a civilian oversight committee. Religious leaders of all faiths held a joint prayer service for healing and understanding. Officer Morrison's body camera footage was released, showing the full incident from his perspective. The audio captured Maya's quiet pleas, the crowd's growing anger, and most importantly, Officer Kim's attempts to intervene. The footage painted a clear picture of what needed to change. At the station, other officers began coming forward with their own stories of witnessing misconduct, but feeling powerless to stop it. Officer Kim's courage had opened a door that couldn't be closed. The blue wall of silence was beginning to crack. The hospital where Dr. Chen worked announced new protocols for patient identification, including special parking passes and ID cards that would make it immediately clear when someone was undergoing treatment. They also started a program to provide free transportation for chemotherapy patients. As evening approached, Maya received an unexpected visitor. It was the nurse who had helped her during the incident. She brought with her a thick envelope. "These are letters," she explained, "from other cancer patients at the hospital. They want you to know you're not alone." Maya opened one letter and began to read. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. "I was always afraid to go out without my wig. But you showed me that our battle scars aren't something to hide. Thank you for being brave when others tried to shame you." The day ended with a candlelight vigil outside the hospital. Hundreds of people gathered, many holding signs with messages of support. But it wasn't just about support anymore. It was about change. Real, lasting change that would ensure no one else would have to go through what Maya did. 3 months after the incident, Maya stood at the podium in the Police Academy Training Center. The room was filled with officers, both veterans and trainees, all watching intently as she adjusted the microphone. She wore a colorful headscarf today, a gift from a support group of cancer survivors who had reached out after her story went viral. "I never thought I'd be standing here," she began, her voice clear and strong. 3 months ago, I was just a girl trying to get home from chemo. Today, I'm here to help make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." In the front row, Officer Kim sat with a group of fellow officers who had formed a new community outreach team. She had become an unexpected leader in the department's transformation, speaking up about the importance of empathy in law enforcement. The changes in the police department had been swift and significant. Every officer now underwent mandatory medical sensitivity training. They learned about various medical conditions, why patients might wear wigs or other medical devices, and how to approach sensitive situations with compassion. "You might think this is just about wigs or cancer patients," Maya continued, gesturing to her scarf. "But it's about something bigger. It's about seeing the person behind whatever makes them look different. It's about remembering that everyone you meet is fighting their own battle." In the back of the room, Dr. Chen watched his daughter with pride. The past months had been challenging, dealing with Maya's ongoing treatment while also handling the media attention and advocacy work. But he had seen his daughter grow stronger, not just in her fight against cancer, but in her determination to create positive change. The training session included role-playing scenarios where officers learned to handle sensitive situations. They practiced approaching people with medical conditions, learned to recognize hospital IDs and medical accessories, and most importantly, were taught to listen first and judge later. During a break, A young officer approached Maya. "I have a sister going through chemo," he shared quietly. "I never really understood what she faced in public until I saw your video. Thank you for helping us do better." The department had also created a new position, Community Health Liaison, and Officer Kim was chosen to lead it. She worked directly with local hospitals, learning about patient needs and concerns. The program she developed was already being copied by other police departments across the country. Maya's story had sparked changes beyond the police force, too. Local businesses started displaying safe space stickers, indicating their staff had been trained to assist people with medical needs. The hospital where Dr. Chen worked began offering free rides to patients after treatment, ensuring they wouldn't have to drive while exhausted. The hardest part of cancer treatment isn't just the physical pain, Maya explained to the officers. It's feeling like you don't belong in normal society anymore. Like you stand out everywhere you go. The last thing we need is to feel afraid of the people who are supposed to protect us. Her words resonated through the room. Some officers took notes, others nodded in understanding. In the months since the incident, many had shared their own stories of family members with cancer or other medical conditions. The issue had become personal for them. The training session ended with something unexpected. A group of cancer patients from the local hospital had come to share their experiences. Each one had a story about feeling vulnerable in public, about wanting to be treated with dignity despite their appearance. One elderly man stood up, removing his cap to reveal his bald head. "I've been fighting cancer for 2 years," he said. "Every time I leave my house, I worry about how people will react. But thanks to what happened to you, Maya, and the changes it's bringing, I feel a little safer now." As the day drew to a close, Maya felt a deep sense of purpose. Her father had always taught her that healing came in many forms. Sometimes it meant fighting cancer with medicine, and sometimes it meant healing the way society treats its most vulnerable members. 6 months had passed since that fateful evening. The police station's community room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Maya sat at one end of a long table, her father beside her, while Officer Morrison sat at the other end. His badge and uniform were gone, replaced by civilian clothes that seemed to hang loosely on his frame. "I've thought about this moment every day," Morrison began, his voice barely above a whisper. "About what I would say when I finally got the chance to look you in the eye." His hands fidgeted with a tissue on the table. The mandatory sensitivity training had changed him. He'd spent months working with cancer support groups, learning about their experiences, understanding the daily challenges they faced. The arrogant officer from that night was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the hard way about compassion. "I was wrong," he continued, looking directly at Maya. "Not just about what I did, but about who I thought I was. I thought being a good officer meant being tough, being suspicious. I forgot about being human." Maya listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a beautiful blue headscarf today, one of many she'd received from well-wishers around the world. Her latest scan had shown good progress in her treatment, and her father had noticed more energy in her smile lately. "Your father," Morrison gestured toward Dr. Chen. "He spoke at one of our training sessions. He told us about how cancer patients fight every day just to feel normal, just to belong. And there I was, taking away your dignity in front of everyone." The room fell silent for a moment. Through the window, they could see Officer Kim in the parking lot, helping an elderly woman with a walker make her way into the station. The department had changed in so many ways since that night. "I didn't come here for an apology," Maya said softly. "I came because I wanted to understand. What made you so sure I was trying to hide something? What made you stop seeing me as a person?" Morrison's eyes welled up with tears. "I had gotten so caught up in looking for suspects that I forgot to look for people. When I saw your wig, I only thought about disguises, about people trying to trick us. I'd never thought about the girl who just wanted to get home after chemo." Maya finished for him. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. Dr. Chen spoke for the first time since the meeting began. As a doctor, I've learned that healing goes both ways. The patient needs to heal, but sometimes the caregiver needs to heal too. Morrison nodded slowly. After everything happened, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing your face, seeing the fear in your eyes. My daughter asked me why people on TV were saying her dad had done something bad. That's when it really hit me. What kind of example was I setting? The conversation continued, touching on changes in police training, new community programs, and the ripple effects of that single incident. Other departments across the country had reached out, wanting to learn from their mistakes and implement similar reforms. I've been working with a cancer support group, Morrison shared. Every week, I listened to their stories. Some of them were afraid to even talk to me at first, but slowly they helped me understand their world. Now I volunteer at the hospital, helping patients get safely to their cars after treatment. Maya's expression softened. That's actually why I agreed to this meeting. One of the patients told me about a kind officer who escorts them to their cars and always asks about their day. She said he really listens. I didn't know it was you. As the meeting drew to a close, Morrison pulled out a small box. The support group asked me to give you this. Inside was a pin, a purple ribbon with the words, "Courage changes everything," engraved on it. Maya picked up the pin, turning it over in her hands. You know what the hardest part was? She asked. Not the humiliation, not the fear. It was thinking that nothing would change, that this would happen to someone else. It won't, Morrison promised, and for the first time, Maya believed him. Your courage changed me. It changed all of us. As they left the station, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Sometimes, Maya realized, the deepest wounds can lead to the most meaningful healing. 1 year had passed. The police academy auditorium was packed with new recruits, seasoned officers, and community members. Maya stood at the podium, looking very different from the frightened girl in the viral video. Her hair had grown back, short but thick, and her eyes sparkled with confidence. A year ago, I was just trying to get home from chemotherapy, she began, her voice carrying through the quiet room. Today, I'm cancer-free, and I'm here to talk about how one moment of darkness led to so much light. In the audience, Officer Morrison sat next to Officer Kim. They now co-led the department's Community Health Alliance, a program that had become a model for police departments nationwide. Their training manual, Seeing the Person First, was being used in academies across the country. When I was sick, my father taught me something important. Maya continued, glancing at Dr. Chen in the front row. He said that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about dignity, understanding, and treating each person as human. The changes over the past year had been remarkable. The police department had transformed its approach to community relations. Every officer now wore a small purple pin, the same design Maya had received from Morrison, reminding them to look beyond appearances. Last week, I met a young girl starting her cancer treatment. Maya shared, her voice softening. She was scared, not of the treatment, but of how people would treat her without her hair. I got to tell her about all of you, about how our police officers now escort patients to their cars, about how they understand what it means to wear a wig or a scarf. The department's new protocols had made headlines. They'd created special cards for medical patients to keep with their ID, making it easy for officers to recognize someone undergoing treatment. The cards weren't just about identification. They were about dignity. Dr. Chen stood up next, joining his daughter at the podium. Together, they had started the Bridge of Understanding Foundation, which worked to connect law enforcement with medical patients and their families. The foundation offered free sensitivity training, support groups, and resources for both officers and patients. A year ago, I was an angry father, Dr. Chen admitted. Today, I'm a proud partner in something much bigger than us. We're not just preventing discrimination, we're building bridges of empathy. Officer Kim shared her story next, explaining how she'd learned to speak up, to stand for what was right even when it was difficult. Her example had inspired other officers to become advocates for change within their departments. The most touching moment came when a group of cancer patients from the local hospital took the stage. They weren't there to share stories of discrimination, but to thank the officers who had made them feel safe, understood, and respected during their treatment journeys. Remember that elderly man who was afraid to leave his house during treatment? Maya asked the audience. He leads our patient support group now. Last month, he helped train 50 new officers on understanding the challenges of cancer patients. Morrison stood up to speak, his voice humble but strong. Maya didn't just change our department, he said. She changed me. She showed us that sometimes our biggest mistakes can lead to our most important lessons. The ceremony concluded with something special, the unveiling of a new police car design. Along the side, beneath the usual police markings, was a simple phrase: protecting with compassion. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. As people mingled afterward, sharing stories and hopes for the future, Maya watched with quiet satisfaction. Her battle with cancer had taught her about physical healing, but this journey had shown her something else: how communities could heal, how understanding could grow from misunderstanding, and how one painful moment could spark lasting change. Ready to go home? Her father asked, putting an arm around her shoulders. Maya smiled, looking around at the room full of officers and community members talking, learning, and growing together. You know what, Dad? I think we're already home. This is exactly where we need to be. The sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Sometimes, Maya realized, the most beautiful transformations come from the darkest moments. Her story hadn't ended that night on the street. It had only just begun.